All right, people, it is fantastic to see all of you. Thank you for being here at the End Book Deserts Conference. I am just thrilled to have this opportunity to co-present to you. And really, this is really just a conversation between two people who admire each other. And I wanted just to present to you literally one of my favorite people on the planet right now. Like this brother, I was just introduced to his work, and I'm mad at myself for really just getting to know him. But I got to know him through our work with the Reading Recovery Council of America, and this brother has done some fantastic work. This is Carlos, and he is founder of the Conscious Connect, which is an organization that has sought to meet the needs of readers in neighborhoods that have been historically marginalized and underdeveloped. And the work that he is doing, I'm gonna let him talk about it. But I want to go ahead and say right now, as we're getting started, the work that he is doing, to me, a longtime literacy educator, is the most important work to be done in the United States right now. I have just been so moved by his example and by his leadership and by his activism and by his friendship. And so I'm just like so happy to be sitting here beside one of my favorite people right now. What's up, Carlos?
Oh man, how's it going, brother? Just thank you so much. Just really, just stunned by the words and just the kind spirit and encouragement that you've been able to give me in just such a short period of time, and just honored and blessed to share this virtual stage and presence with you. As you know, you are certainly a literary champion and a literary giant in this field, man. So just to hear you speak those words on my name and the work that I'm doing, really as a vehicle and vessel for a higher being, man. I truly appreciate it.
Man, thank you. And because the people here, are getting to know us, like I would just love to ask you about like the Conscious Connect, like, just this idea that, I see so many young people, go to school, get the education, graduate, and they go get theirs, man. Like it would have been really easy. I mean, you are a brilliant individual. It would have been really easy to go get the job. It would have been really easy to, to go start an organization, but you decided to start the Conscious Connect. Talk about what it is and just like what that process was like for you.
Yeah, so I started the Conscious Connect with one of my good buddies from undergrad by the name of Moses B. Mbaseha. And we were really engaged on campus related at Wittenberg University, related to social activism, which is in my hometown in Springfield, Ohio, in between Dayton and Columbus. But we really just wanted to do more. But shortly after we graduated, I went on to grad school at the University of Dayton. He went back to his hometown and State College in Pennsylvania. And I was studying higher education for my master's degree at the time, and working with students in higher ed was pretty cool, and it's something that I still do. I still work at the University of Dayton for my full-time job right now, but I wanted to be a part of community, just out there, particularly in communities of color that have been historically disenfranchised. And I was like, I feel like I'm kind of missing something. And then, I kind of, I was kind of inspired by a gentleman by the name of Theaster Gates, who was in Chicago. He was kind of acquiring dilapidated properties, repurposing them into community spaces, kind of restoring the neighborhood. And I was like, man, this is fantastic. We need this in my community. We were back at homecoming, at a homecoming game, and I pitched the idea to a couple of my high school friends. Probably, was overly excited. One drink too many, probably, but all of them were for it. So then, I hadn't even graduated from grad school at the time. We were fresh out of undergrad. Student debt like most other millennials across the country. So we didn't really have many resources. We just had a will to, fill the gaps. But, the thing that I think was important is that, we knew that we wanted to kind of be in a space related to education, culture, working with youth, but we didn't want to dictate that to the community. I think that we see that so many times across all spectrums, and we say, oh, well, this is a problem, perceived or real. This is the solution. What we did is we went out and talked to people. And every person that we talked to, business owner, faith-based leaders, just everyday folks. At that point in time, everybody was talking about reading, third grade reading guarantee, things of that nature. And we kind of, we seen that gap. And we said, how can we fill it? At the same time, we were seeing a gentleman from Barbershop Books and the great work that he was doing in the bureaus of New York. And we said, man, that's a great concept. And we also seen a guy, a barber out of Iowa that was cutting a boy's hair for free for reading a book. He was reading a book with Babe Ruth on it. We said that's great. Babe Ruth is a legend, but why we need these kids to be reading about Satchel Paige, Josh Gibson, Hank Aaron. So that kind of became our calling card. We started to expand, barbershops, and then we were the first organization to also include beauty salons as well. Got a couple of laundromats, healthcare clinics, but also the culturally relevant component of it was really, really important. So that kind of became our calling card, and we came across research around book deserts and the data behind that from Susan Newman. But that program called The Root in the barbershops and beauty salons was really, obviously we're operating within a book desert, and that is a term that I would also encourage us to continuously think about here in this space at this conference, right? And something that I've learned from other organizers, specifically here in Dayton, Ohio, that are working to address issues of food justice, right? Is that it's not just a food or a book desert, it's really a food and a book apartheid, right? Meaning that, deserts are really natural, right? These things are man-made, food deserts, book deserts. These are by systematic design, right? So challenging the language there. So really what we're addressing is book apartheid, and the lack of accessible, affordable, culturally relevant, print-rich materials within walking distance. So the walking distance component became key for us because we know not everybody was going to a barbershop or a beauty salon. Not everybody even has the luxury to be able to pay for those services. And books did leave those spaces, but we really structured it initially to stay in the space, and we were like, we're just not closing that book that apartheid gap of having 13 age appropriate books in every household. So how can we get that? And obviously we ran into the invention of little libraries. We said, how do we adapt that to our community? So we that's what we did, and we call them houses of knowledge, kind of play on words of the literary icon Rudine Sims Bishop, who created the Mirrors, Windows, and Doors framework for culturally relevant context. So the first barbershop that we ever launched was where my son and I go. The first house of knowledge that we ever put was on my front lawn of my property. So I think that's also important, is starting where you are with what ability that you have. I didn't have to ask anybody for permission to put a little library on my front lawn. I just did it, right? And sometimes in our communities, seeing is also believing. So we started going out there every week. By the time we looked up, we had 65 barbershops and beauty salons with literacy stations. Now we got 30 free little libraries that we operate across a 50-mile radius. And that's how we put out most of our for our books. But I'll kind of just stop there for now. That's kind of those are kind of the foundation of how we built our program.
But man, you did it. Like, that so many people walk around and we see the problem, we name the problem, but then you went to the community and said, like, how can I be of service? And every great human that has ever walked this planet has asked that question. We go back to prophets, we go to civil rights leaders, we go to our foremothers, and so just that you exist in that tradition is so powerful to bear witness to, man. So just like, thank you. That's really exciting, and one of the things that I know, and I'll just go ahead and say it, people see the work that we do, and they talk about it in these ways where they almost like, it's almost like magic to people, right? Like, people come like, oh, Karlos, what he does is magical, right? I can't be like Karlos or Cornelius, what he does is magical. And I always tell people, nah, this ain't magic. This like Karlos, like, positioned himself to be able to do this work. and anybody can, that Carlos is a powerful person, but like you've been super intentional about how you move through community space. You've been super intentional about how you listen to people and how you champion their ideas and how you make things into reality. Can you walk us through that process? Because we're at a conference with
Yeah.
other literacy champions, right? And I am hoping that people watch this conversation, and I'm hoping that people say, you know what, this thing that Carlos did, even though he makes it look magical, even though he makes it look easy, this thing, I can replicate it in my community, or I can replicate it in my neighborhood. Can you walk us through the process of
Yeah.
again?
Yeah, absolutely. For sure. Kind of what I was saying about before is not wanting to dictate what that solution looks like uh for for a particular community that we were serving. And I think people also think that because we're the communities that we're focused on in South Springfield and West Dayton are low to moderate income communities, communities of color, but we're operating, but the populations that we're serving are not monolithic, right? So even in a singular zip code in South Springfield, where we have multiple literary access points, where we have multiple reading parks, even in a singular zip code a mile away from each other, those communities are very different in the needs and the way that we have to connect and engage, very different. And I think for us, with the community, with this community work, is that I think it's really been a benefit to us. And most people will look at it and say, "Oh man, like, dang, how are you doing this?" Is that even still to this day, 6 years in, we do not operate from brick and mortar structure. So we are forced to go out and be with community. I think a lot of times, even when we have these great resources and services, either people don't know about them, don't feel like our spaces may or may not be inclusive or accessible, or we're just simply waiting for people to come to us. We wanted to take the resources directly to the people, and building that physical infrastructure, building that literary oasis and that literary ecosystem of book acquisition and distribution to create a multi-generational community of readers. So, also, building those relationships and sometimes seeing is doing. So, I am from Springfield, Ohio. That's the community that I was born and raised in, but we're also operating in Dayton, Ohio as well, where I'm not from. And Dayton is a very hyper social political community. And it can be tough to crack in that community, particularly when you're not a native Daytonian. And sometimes it's just putting in the work. I can't tell you how many hours we put in, literally digging holes in the ground, putting in, 2x4s, putting in Quick stirring it up with water to cement the posts of our little libraries. Like, and people see that, like, we put in countless hours, installing benches at our reading parks. Like, we put in that physical labor to that. And, so when you talk about kind of this, some people perceiving it to be magical, we really, have really, in some ways, um, really stolen like the proverbial artist, right? And taking inspirations from all other people, right? Again, I pay homage to the gentleman that started Barbershop Books, right? We adapted and modified that concept to our needs. Little Library was already a global phenomenon long before I was even thinking about that, right? We have a Words on Wheels book bite that's now permanently housed at Gym City Market, which is a cooperative worker member owned grocery store in West Dayton that's seeking to solve the issue of food insecurity. Now our Words on Wheels book bike is now in there permanently in partnership um, with the Dayton Metro Library. But our inspiration for the book bike came from a Black librarian by the name of Anita Kelly, who I seen in an article riding a book bike she works for the Los Angeles Public Library. So there were all of these various different inspirations that we pulled from, right? I think so, really that's not there's some level of creativity to piece them all together to create this ecosystem, but that's leveraging other best practices that come from across the nation. And I think the motto that of our organization since we found it was where common thought meets uncommon action. So all of these, everybody, there's people right now in everybody's community, and maybe people listening and watching this right now, it's you. You're the one. You have these ideas. These are common thoughts. Many people have these ideas. With the distinction is the execution, and sometimes that's just waking up and tending to the work, even when you feel like you don't have any more left to give.
But like what you're describing, as a New Yorker, what you're describing is so hip hop, right? Like that I'm first generation hip hop, and taking something that has already been done well and repurposing it, for new audiences. That's what you're doing. It's that ethos. So it's taking that disco and repurposing it, taking it that soul and repurposing it, taking that rock and roll and repurposing it for new ventures. And that's just the work that you're doing, man. Just like thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I would love to ask you, in terms of, kind of people also looking at you, in terms of being, a magician, and I have gotten to know you on a really deeply personal level, and just seeing the work that you do, in the classroom, but also knowing that this is more than, it's not performance. This is real life. This is who you are, both in the classroom and right here living, breathing in the flesh. So, talk to us about kind of the element of leveraging best practices, as a, really a scientist of teaching, and as a practitioner in the classroom, and what that looks like for you and the work that you do.
Well, absolutely. I mean, just this question of literacy that we're all here to talk about, so many people see Black men, Black people like us, and they're like, oh, well, they're only good at what they do because they're Black like the kids, or they're only good at what they do because they're from the same neighborhood. And I'm like, nah, I'm good at what I do because I took time to study how to teach. I studied pedagogy. I took time to study phonemic awareness. I took time to study like how kids like express themselves verbally, and so I think it's really, really important that, yeah, it's good to be like kind and altruistic, but part of the thing that I think about is like, who do I need to study with and what can I study so that I can be better at my craft? Like, I just love that you've paid attention to librarians in LA, you've paid attention to entrepreneurs across the Midwest, and you said, like, yeah, I'm gonna study them so I can do my thing, in my community. And so when I think about like reading, and I'm all about fun, and I'm all about the love, and I'm all about the joy, but then I'm all about helping, kids to see their own growth and to see, the beauty of this pursuit. And so, yeah, like it's not magic. There's a real intentionality to this, and that's one of the things that I hope that people, in this conference take away. That one of the things I always say to people is hope is not a strategy. Right? Hope is important to have hope. It is important to hold on to hope, but hope ain't going to teach these kids how to read. Right? Like hope ain't gonna put books in people's homes, right? And so that is intentional work, that is intentional design, that is intentional collaboration, and that is intentional study and reflection, and then thinking about how I get better, right? And so I am a hopeful person, but I always move strategically, right? And so if I want kids to read, I can be hopeful, but I also have to understand phonics, right? Like if I want kids to have access to books, I can be hopeful, but I also have to understand how the economics of this community work and how the interpersonal relationships in this communities work. That I can't just be in people's homes talking about books without understanding what the community is, right? Because that's colonizing, right? That anytime you act on someone's behalf without their consent, that's colonial, right? And we know that colonial mentalities are what got us in, these book apartheids, is what's got us in these food and healthcare apartheids. And so I'm really just into the intentionality, of it, and so
That's
for,
inspiring.
yeah, yeah,
That's inspiring, man. Definitely, the intentionality, behind your work, and that, and to me, that's really speaking to, getting to equitable outcomes, right? And
yeah,
the difference between, and doing the work and showing up and giving that labor of love, because what we know is that a lot of times people's intentions don't equal their impact. They produce inequitable outcomes, but they say, oh, but my intention was X, Y, and Z. But no, your practices actually perpetuated or further, promoted inequities or lack of of inclusion or access, right? So I just appreciate, the ways in which, you continue to show up and put,
Yeah.
populations that have been historically on the margins, you putting them in the center of your work.
Thank you, man. And I got it, just, like you said, giving credit where credit is due. One of the things that my father used to always say, and we talk about the work of literacy being work to actively combat racism, sexism, homophobia, and classism, right? Working actively to combat, even the kind of ableism that we see in communities, right? And my father used to say to me when I was young, he was like, you don't judge the racist by how nice or kind they are. People are like, oh, I'm kind, I can't be racist. I'm nice, I can't be racist. He's like, you judge the racist by the outcomes that they consistently produce,
Right.
right? So when we look at schools and all the white kids can read, but the brown kids can't,
Yep.
I don't care how nice the people are in that school, you are
Right.
producing racist outcomes, right? Or if we look at a community and all of the people in that community, the wealthy people in that community are supported to be literate, but then the poor and middle class people in that community are not supported to be literate, that is a classist community, regardless of how kind or nice the policymakers are there. And so again, going back to that idea that you don't judge the oppressor by how nice or kind they are in their interpersonal relationships, you judge the oppressor by the outcomes that they consistently produce. And so I am really all about, putting my proverbial money where my mouth is, that I want to produce outcomes that show kids being more literate over time. Right. And so what is it that I need to do? What is it that I need to learn? What is it that I need to adjust in my practice so that I can ensure that? That's been really important to me. Yeah.
Man, definitely appreciate that, man. And it's it's always great talking to you because you know you're in the classroom, right? And I'm in the community, right? We partner with schools. Some schools are more, I would say, more receptive to community partnerships than others. So for you, what do you really see as where we need to go as a collective? You've founded the minor collective, and just talking about that, and how can we partner and be in community with one another, both in traditional spaces as well as non-traditional spaces as well.
Absolutely. And so much of that work is literally learning how to be in partnership with one another. That one of the things that I realized, I have a great friend who I wronged. And so I had to call her one day to apologize. And we were talking about it, and we were just sitting on the phone in that uncomfortable silence. After you've wronged somebody, it's really uncomfortable to make that phone call and to sit on the phone and just be like, yo, I did, I messed up. And one of the things that she helped me to understand on that phone call, she was just like, Cornelius, there isn't really a blueprint for being in community with somebody after you've wronged them. Like we don't know how to do this. That as a species, we haven't always been good at this. Like we've always resorted to conflict. We've always resorted to opportunity hoarding and to resource hoarding, right? And so when people are in conflict, even if they're not fighting physically, they fight in other ways, right? So I'm gonna take all the books from me and my people, and
Yeah.
you and your people ain't gonna have enough books on your side. Or I'm gonna take all the food or opportunity from me and my people, and you and your people ain't gonna have the same. So there's this competitive thing. And so when I think about what we do in Minor Collective, a big part of it is learning that I'm like, you know what? I'm realizing that a lot of folks don't even know how to be in community with one another. So to be proximate to one another and then to learn how to be in community. And that's going to differ from individual to organization to organization. And so a lot of the work that I do, for example, when I partner with schools, is like we'll start out by being like, how do we even want to be in community with each other? Like, who do you need me to be for you? And here's who I need you to be for me, and here's who we can be together for children, right? And so, but it's defining that there are so many times where we take this, like you said, prescriptive approach. Where we're like, oh well, we're adults and we know what to do for children. We're going to do this, this, and this, but we never go ask the children. We never go ask the families. And so, one of the first things that I do, when we partner, is I spend a lot of time listening, like you. So we go to where people are and we listen, but we don't just listen, but we say, if I do this thing, would that be okay in this community, right? And so that idea of consent, right? That again, anything that happens in a community that's not consensual is colonial, right? And so really just going back to this idea of, you know, and I'm always even, and I use that word intentionally because I'm always thinking about the history and the uneasy histories that we share as a nation, right? One of the things that is not lost on me is when we seek to destroy entire peoples and cultures. So when we think about, like, what happened to indigenous people at the founding of this republic, right? you know I always remember that before they sent guns, they sent teachers, right? They sent people to divorce people of their language. They sent people to divorce people from their customs and ways of knowing. And so education has been the tip of the spear for a lot of violence to a lot of people, right? And so when we are in community with one another, it's about undoing that ancestral violence. That there are lots of communities that are very wary of educators, right, and educational institutions, right, and rightfully so. And so I'm always thinking about, when I'm in community with people, how can I be in community with people in ways that are affirming and in ways that are generative. And so I know we have a lot of organizers who are listening to this right now, and that would be like a little nugget that I would hand over, is that, again, if our work is all about we know best, so we're going to do this for the community, that is a tradition that we do not need to revisit, right? That this work can happen in collaboration. So that's
Absolutely,
it.
man. Appreciate those words of wisdom, and definitely, that's the nugget that I'm taking away from this conversation already. Is this: if you're not getting consent, then what you're doing is colonial. So definitely appreciate you parting that on us. And I would say, related to being in community. As I said before, we don't operate from a brick and mortar structure. So literally every single program, every single initiative, even every single access point that we have is in partnership or collaboration with another entity. And sometimes an entity is an individual, right? That individuals also have their own agency, right? You don't always have to partner with a nonprofit organization or a government, system, or a school, right? Sometimes it's those everyday people in your community, man. And I can even, speak to another initiative. We have reading parks. We own 6 properties. We operate. Those consist of 3 pocket parks, and 1 green space that we're about to transform into another pocket park. And we acquired these from what's called the Clark County Land Bank. They're a quasi-governmental organization. They address and remove dilapidated structures and look to transfer them to adjacent property owners or nonprofit organizations such as ourselves. So we work with them. We do beautification, landscaping, hardscaping. Two of our pocket parks have commercial basketball courts on them that we had to advocate to the city to change zoning codes that hadn't been amended in 40 years. And we had to get support from residents that live right in that vicinity, because it's a zoning issue. It has to go before zoning. They email it out to all of the residents if anybody wants to make objections. And there was just such an overwhelming support because they wanted that in their community. Because the process, when we initially acquired the property, we knew that we were then going to also acquire an adjacent property right next to it that was also had a dilapidated house. And we asked the residents and the neighbors, well, what do y'all want to see as we begin to develop out this pocket park? And this was our first pocket park. We had no idea what we were getting into. But there was an elderly woman, Miss Mary is her name. She lives across the street, has been there for multiple decades. That summer she had bought a basketball court, and it was, just like it is in a lot of urban neighborhoods. It was sitting on the sidewalk. They were playing out there in the street with her hard-earned money. And I think that they probably had it a couple levels too low, dunked on it too hard. By summer's end, it was just a rim hanging, no backboard. So we asked the people, "What do y'all want?" They said, "We want a basketball court over here." Didn't know how we were going to make that happen, but we started having those conversations. And we found a local construction company that installed the court for us, put down the concrete slab, with in-kind services. and then, we continue to really just build on that. And, we were able to partner with a local youth organization as well to, put a mural on the basketball court as well. And it was, based on a book, that they read a book, The Crossover. They read the Crossover book, and that was an inspiration for the design. And we partnered with the residents. We showed 3 different mock-ups from community artists, and they selected which one that they wanted in this space. So creating space and creating opportunities for ownership, right? I think place and space is so critical in the work that we do. That's really what we are. We're really a place and space organization, right? Transforming underutilized spaces and creating opportunities at the intersections of education, culture, health, and peace. And you were talking also about health apartheid. And I would say as a social entrepreneur, this work, I personally struggled with it, probably even until like the last year and a half. I would talk to people and they would know exactly what they were. Oh, I'm an engineer, I'm an accountant, I'm a teacher. And then I'm like, man, I don't really know what I am.
Exactly.
And then I just at one point in time I got comfortable. I'm a social entrepreneur. I wear whatever hat might be necessary to solve whatever particular issue it is. And now my doctoral research is on the pocket parts and the reading parts of the Conscious Connect. And when I started doing my literature review, I'm like, man, no, this is what we were just trying to beautify the neighborhood. Then it's like, no, what we're doing is this is in the arena of public health. And I'm reading all the research in that. It's saying creating these green spaces. There's a woman by the name of Eugenia South out of University of Penn, and that she studied all these she did a randomized control sample, and greening the vacant lots, it reduced depression of neighbors within that area. I mean, it reduced gun violence, increased community, increased physical activity, and so that's kind of the next thing is looking at these intersections. And there's probably some people at this conference right now more educated on the topic of, well, way more educated than me in terms of adverse childhood experiences. But I'm thinking, what we're looking at as adverse environmental conditions, right? So I'm thinking about how to connect this public health research to adverse childhood experiences. I mean, how detrimental it is from your health as well as psychologically if you're a student, a young child or a youth, and all you're seeing in your community is neglect, vacant lots, dilapidated structures, man, just monumental consequences, man. So, our next objective is, we're really just like the literary access point. We want to ensure that all our residents have walking access to at least one green space and/or park within their neighborhood.
My man, and that's it. You've named it. I think, I'm just so lucky to be connected to you. I think we at this conference are lucky to be able to hear these ideas of ways that you authentically serve, right? That we don't just establish organizations, but rather we serve, we connect. And so just thank you for being who you are. Now, of course, I don't want to end this conversation, without asking you about your reading life, because this is a reading conversation. And you and I both know that reading is multimodal, right? We exist in the 21st century. So reading is the songs we listen to, the movies we watch, the video games we play, so what are you into right now? What's your thing? What are you doing? What books you got? What movies are on deck? What's giving you life right now?
For sure. I would say definitely, in terms of books, man, unfortunately, I haven't been able to read so much for leisure or books of my choosing, I should say, right now. I'm in the throes of this doctoral program, so I pretty much just read whatever they put on the syllabi. But I can say as a young person, I was inspired by the collection, the African American Achievement Series, and the late great Coretta Scott King wrote the foreword for almost majority of those, and it's a collection of probably 50 or 60 different prolific African American leaders And these were books that used to be in my household as a young person. Um, and I used to read, the biographies of these folks, and just would be inspired to be like these individuals long before I was really old enough to even conceptualize, their actual historical impact on the global society. And those books used to sit on a shelf of a bookshelf that was of my great great grandmother, who was a daughter of a slave owner. And the crazy thing is that those books, those were my mom's books. After I had graduated from college, she during college she moved out to Houston, Texas. When we launched the Conscious Connect and started to go into our first barbershops and beauty salons, she shipped those books back to me in Ohio, and those were the first books that we ever put into any barbershop or beauty salons. So everything, when you live and walk in purpose, everything kind of comes full circle. So everything comes full circle, and for me, I would say, from a musical standpoint, I listen to a lot of different music, but the J. Cole's The Off Season was kind of the thing. Oh man, that was definitely fire to me. So from a musical standpoint, that's definitely what I was kind of been in my ear most lately. That's been pretty prolific. But how about yourself? What's kind of in your intellectual and cultural digest at the moment?
Man, right now I'm doing all the things. I've been home in remote learning with my kids most of the year, and so much of it has been reading what they read and watching them fall in love with books. Um, I have just fallen in love, complete love with Renee Watson and her work. My daughter is a third grader and just really became a voracious reader. And the first author that she fell in love with was Renee Watson. And watching your daughter appreciate an author, because I'm a book person, right? Like I'm so into books. And so, but watching my daughter become that person has just been real special. And so to see how she's like, well, Daddy, when the next book coming out? Or Daddy, like, can we go get it? Or Daddy, can you call Renee Watson?
Right,
And I'm like, your daddy don't know everybody.
right, right, right.
But I really got on it. I was like, well, I need to know Renee Watson, because like, I mean, and there would be days where like that's all she would talk about. And so just watching my kid fall in love with an author was so beautiful. And so her book, Ways to Make Sunshine, has literally transformed my life. And I've read thousands of books across my lifetime, but the one book that gets your kid, or the one author that gets your kid, that's a different kind of experience. And so I just had that experience. So that book, I'm a huge comic book fan. I read a lot of comic books. And so and I always pass this on to teachers, and I always want to say this in front of teachers and educators and community people, that people like to create these hierarchies. Well, this is literature and this is not. The first book that I ever read from cover to cover was my ninth grade year. I read Hardware, a comic book by Dwayne McDuffie. And so that is, so comic books continue to give me life, and actually, as a ninth grader, I wrote a letter to Dwayne McDuffie after I read that book. I was so impressed with myself for being able to read a book from cover to cover. I was so just enamored with the characters and the world that he had built. Like, I felt seen. And I remember writing him a letter as a ninth grader, wrote him a letter, and he published that letter in the back of Hardware #7. So for all my old school comic book heads out here, if you go and you find a copy of Hardware #7, there's a letter from young Cornelius Minor in the back of that comic book. And once I saw that, I was like, oh, I can write a letter to an author and they will publish my words in the back of a book. I was like, oh, I'm publishing everything now. Like,
Right.
so in many ways, my career as a writer started then. And so those are the things. But yeah, like I consume way too much hip hop. I love it. I love it. I love it. Right now, I am in an interesting way. I'm really into Lil Baby. Like I've been, like I'm really into Lil Baby. You know, his story is a story that mirrors the lives of so many of our students. You know, I have, you know, I started with the music, but then after I listened to the music and was really enamored with the music, I wanted to know more about the person. And Lil Baby was reading at age 3 when he was 3 years old. He was already reading, and he was asking critical questions. He was a genius, like this kid, right? And his mom did everything she could to support his genius. And so at age 4, he was like labeled as gifted. But then here's what happened when he got to school. When he got to school, they treated him like a loudmouth black boy. They all they saw or all they heard was the noise, but they didn't see the genius,
Right.
right? Or all they saw was that he won't sit down, but they didn't see the intellect, right? Or all they saw was he didn't raise his hand, but they didn't see the creativity, right? And so he ended up, even though he was identified as gifted before he even entered school, when he got to school, all they saw was the exterior, all they saw was the behaviors, right? And so many of our black and brown boys, so many of our black and brown girls are pushed out of school in that way because we don't know how to see beyond behavior, or we don't know how to see beyond demeanor. We only know how to see those things. And so Lil Baby's story has really resonated with me as an educator. You know, one of the first major donations that he made when he made it big was he gave money to his principal. You know, like he went back to his high school, and and one of the things that he said that really kind of struck me is he was just like, you know, he's like, you were one of the people who was responsible for me getting kicked out of school.
Mhm.
And so I'm making this first donation intentionally to your school because I want you to see me, the person that you put out of school, that I still care about this. I still care about education. I still care about the people who were here, you know. And so, so I've just been just in love with Lil Baby's story, and his music I've found really compelling to kind of analyze and examine and experience in a bunch of different ways. But man, but that's so much of what you're doing. You know, you're helping people to see our children as full humans, and I just could not thank you enough. You know, just as a father, as a teacher, as a literacy, you know, as a literacy champion, as somebody who is just like interested in wanting a better world, man, you are really lighting the way. And so I think, you know, we as a global society are lucky to have people like you among us. So thank you.
Man, hey, I appreciate that so much, brother. Man, it was just this conversation has been all inspiring. I'm pretty sure I'll be up to 1 a.m. this morning, just working, thinking out more ideas, man. Just pleasure, just sharing this virtual space and stage
Yeah.
with you, man. And your work continues to be inspirational to myself and so many others. And I hope that we're just scratching the surface and starting on what could be a long-standing relationship in this field.
Indeed, indeed. Well, all the best to you, man. All the best. All right. Take care, everybody, and enjoy the rest of the conference. This is Carlos Marshall, Cornelius Minor, man. Like, again, thank you for being champions for children.
Absolutely. Take care.